Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Solar Plata's webinar of today. This is a webinar we're going to be hosting for solar in the Nordics, analyzing the PV project journey and the regional PPA market. This is related to our very first event we're going to be doing in Stockholm on April 1st, 2020. That's our first event there, covering the whole region, the Solar Future Nordics. So again, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to attend this webinar, and let's get the ball rolling. So I'll make a very quick introduction about this event. We will have then afterwards two nice presentations. The first one from Alexander Sauer, who's a project manager at BayWa, and then Mikkel Kring, who's a partner at Our New Energy. At the end of the presentation, depending on how it goes, we should have 10 to 15 minutes to have some Q&A, and then I will finish with a few final words to end this webinar. And we'll do our best to finish at 4 o'clock sharp Amsterdam time. What about Solar Plaza? Most of us attending already know about us, but it's always nice to have a quick reminder. We're a company organizing events. We're based in Rotterdam. We're a bit more than 15 years old, actually. We've celebrated that anniversary last year. Growing company, we're getting close to 50 employees. We have made already so far more than 140 events in more than 40 countries. We have a network of 60,000 people, and we really our intent there is to do everything we can to push and promote the growth of solar energy, and more generally renewable, but really we're focusing on solar energy. Some events, so again, I said earlier today, this webinar is intended to really push for our first event in the Nordics, the Solar Future Nordics. That's going to take place in Stockholm in Sweden on April 1st, 2020. And as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, we have our very early bird pricing campaign, which is the lowest possible price for you to access the event, which is expiring this Friday. This Friday, end of the day, so 23, 59 and 59 seconds. You can register at that favorable price on nordics.thesolarfuture.com/register-here. You don't have to note everything right now. All of you attending the webinar will get a PDF version of this presentation later on. And we're also taking the opportunity to promote some of our coming events for the year. Another market which is really booming right now and in which we're doing our first event is Poland. So we will be doing the Solar Future Poland on May 7th in Warsaw. We will be doing the second edition of our French event, obviously with me, as you can hear with a French accent, on May 28, 2020 in Paris, so second edition. And actually we've just launched the promotional campaign for this event today, and we've put the first version of our program online on this one today. And a big event, our flagship event, I would even say, for Europe, Solar Asset Management Europe. We've done lots of editions. This one will be our second edition in Germany, in Frankfurt, November 12 and 13. So I hope you'll be interested by these. We've got different events in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Spain, etc. But I'm not going to bore you more with that. Let's focus a bit more back on the Nordics. So this event in the Nordics, again, first one, first conference we're doing fully dedicated to solar energy in the Nordic and Baltic region. Our intent there is really to push this market, which is still relatively tiny, relatively untouched, but with a lot of potential. The regions we're covering by the terms Nordic Baltic, typically Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden. And of course, the event is open to all the international companies who already do business in that region, or who are actually curious about it, want to learn more about it, and just get into solar energy in that region. We're intending to have a bit more than 100 attendants. Very first event for us there. Also 5 sponsors and exhibitors that will be able to display to you as attendants their services, capabilities, technology. And it's really going to be a place where you can meet people from all sorts of backgrounds, maybe associations, developers, financiers, consultants. You will have people attending from EPCs, installers, etc. So trying to have the right people, if I may say, in the room to just meet, understand what's happening in solar in the Nordic, and really push the business in that region. Quick practical information about this webinar. If you have any questions or technical issues, use the question box. I'm not alone in this room. We have like the pleasure to have like Marco Dorotal with us today, helping us with all the IT, supporting us. So if you got any question, just like drop that, we'll take care of it during the presentations. Send your questions also to the presenters, to Alexander and Mikkel. During the presentation, you should have a question box on your access and on your screen. Shoot your questions whenever you want. We'll moderate them, and we will have the Q&A session again at the end. I guess like 16:45, 16:50, something like this. Anyway, the last 10-15 minutes of this hour will be focused on Q&A. Again, I said presentation slides will be made available to you immediately after the webinar. And there will also be like webinar recordings put online later on this week. Oh yeah, and the presentation slides, sorry, I've not precised that properly, will be available also in the handout section in our website. With this said, I will soon stop, and I will leave like the floor to Alexander Sauer, who's a project manager from BayWa. Alexander has a degree in law and business administration and a very interesting career in different places. So Alexander started his career in Spain as an attorney. Then he ended up moving to Italy. Well, he didn't end up, he moved to Italy in a completely different business, the waste industry, if I remember well. And then still in Italy, moved to the PV business in 2009. He's now working for BayWa. He's been working for BayWa since 2011. And currently, his role is to handle projects, PV projects in the UK, Netherlands, Italy, and Denmark. Alexander, we're going to pass you the control of the systems, and you will be able to run your presentation. So good luck to you, and thanks to the audience for being with us today again.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction and for this presentation of the very interesting seminars and events that you have coming up this year. Today, the topic is solar in the Nordics. Let me see, do I already have the presentation under control? Not yet. There we are. Solar in the Nordics. My name is Alexander Sauer. I work for BayWa RE Solar Projects, a German company. Just a few words on BayWa in case you haven't heard about us. BayWa is a company that has various divisions. One is agriculture, the other is construction, and the third one in the middle, as you can see, is energy. In our case, energy are traditional energies and renewable energies. And the renewable energies are concentrated in an entity that's called BayWa RE. Is it working? Now it's working. Okay. As you can see, BayWa has roughly had a turnover in 2018 of 16 billion. Roughly a tenth of that is with RE. The EBIT share was a bit higher. We had a good year in 2018. And yeah, something that may be of interest to you in this presentation is that BayWa RE is present in 23 countries, BayWa a bit more in 40. Effectively, BayWa was founded in 1923, nearly 100 years ago. BayWa RE is a bit younger, as the renewable energies are not around since 100 years. The next slide shows you that we are covering the entire renewable energy value chain with what we believe to be a strong track record. On the project side, we have realized 3 gigawatts of wind, solar, and bioenergy. We have quite a considerable project pipeline of 10 gigawatts coming up. Our services colleagues are also very active. They have 7.7 gigawatts under operational management. We'll see the division between solar and wind on the next slide. And we have our solutions colleagues who offer solutions on the B2B and B2C market. Here we also have colleagues who are trading in hardware like panels and inverters. Here you can see the 23 countries that we are active in. We started in Europe with a very strong backbone in countries like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, to name but a few. We branched out to Northern America, and we have colleagues of ours working in the APAC region, but also in Africa. When I see we, obviously we speak about colleagues who do wind projects, me and us from the solar team, and we have our colleagues from the trading and solar components division who are also active, as you can see, in quite a number of countries. Here you see, as I promised, the rough division of our colleagues doing the O&M, the operation and maintenance. Roughly 2.9 megawatts of solar PV under management, 2.7 of wind are managed by them. And now the topic of today's meeting is solar in the Nordics. BayWa RE is present in the Nordic countries since 2006. We are active in trading in solar components, as you have seen in the last slide. We have colleagues who work in the wind business, the solar energy projects we are also working on, and we do asset management there. Our colleagues in wind started a bit earlier than we did. They started in 2006 with project development and asset management. They currently have over 130 megawatt in construction, over 80 megawatts in asset management, and a successfully permitted pipeline of over 375 megawatts. Now, we in the solar division started last year and a bit before that to enter into the Nordics. Our first foot coming from Germany obviously was set in Denmark, where we have over 200 megawatts in an advanced development status and a pipeline of over 800 of additional solar projects that we are working on. Now, as you know, currently there is no feed-in tariff or other subsidy that we know of being at hand in the Nordic countries. So our belief is that it has to happen in grid parity. And here we thought that we could have two interesting poll questions to you guys to keep you also a bit involved and to see how you actually assess the Nordic markets. Now, I hand over to you, Thomas, or shall I briefly go through that?
Indeed. So we are putting the polls online. I think the audience is now seeing them. So for the audience, we'll leave like those two polls for like roughly like 30, 40 seconds each. They're very similar, same questions, same answers, sorry, slightly different questions. First one is, in how many years do you expect that the first gigawatt of solar capacity will be installed in Denmark without subsidies? Is it in the next year? Will it take 2 to 3 years? Will it take 5 years? Or will that actually never happen? We're seeing some questions coming. While I'm talking, you will see like when we will switch to the next question, it's the same thing, but for Sweden. So same story, same question. In how many years do you in the audience expect the first gigawatt of unsubsidized solar to be installed in Sweden? But what do you think yourself, Alexander? You got any expectation, or you have no clue? You're curious? What's your gut feeling?
Well, to be completely honest, I'm very curious, and when thinking about that now, I thought perhaps we should have made it even more provocative in a sense. Yeah, we could have chosen Denmark and perhaps another country like Finland or Norway, probably taking Denmark and Sweden. Let's see what the result is. They may be very similar due to their vicinity. Yeah. Perhaps we could have chosen another country that is a bit further, or Latvia, as you mentioned, yeah, where I don't know, will we ever see 1 giga of solar installed in Latvia? I would have some doubts. Perhaps there's land used for other purposes, yeah. So I'm actually quite curious. Did you now open the second question? Are people supposed to answer on Sweden now? Because it changed on my screen. I now see in how many years do you expect that the first gigawatt of solar capacity will be installed in Sweden? Right?
And indeed, we just changed. Like we didn't say anything to the audience. I didn't want to interrupt you. So we've had like some very nice answers from the first one. Like we had like 80% of the audience answering. We are not going to share the answers yet. I'm taking notes of that because it's a very clear answer on Denmark. And let's see, like the audience is still voting on Sweden. So let's see what we're getting. Let's leave the audience a few more seconds for Sweden. And then I'll share the results with you. Well, maybe at the end of your presentation, and then we can bounce back on that in the Q&A answer.
Exactly. That's a good idea.
Perfect. And I think we're now done with also the results for Sweden.
Perfect.
So the floor is back to you, Alexander. You should be able to continue with your presentation. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, it did indeed work. So I'm actually also very curious to see the results, whether there's any difference. Well, grid parity. Grid parity is actually something that we in BayWa do have some experience with. As you know, we have been working on the Don Rodrigo project, which was in southern Spain. And the question is, can we take the experience made in Spain to the Nordics? And the idea that we had with the presentation is to see to walk from south to north, in a sense, and then end up in the Nordics. So briefly, for those of you who haven't heard about Don Rodrigo, it is a project in southern Spain, in Sevilla. It's the first European subsidy-free solar projects of this scale. It is the largest that we as BayWa RE have done, with 175. And it is the first project in Spain with a long-term PPA of 15 years. You probably all heard that the PPA was signed with Statkraft. And coming from the industry, you will not be surprised that nothing less than 93,000 Spanish households can actually, well, the equivalent of the energy produced is 93,000 Spanish households. The size, 270 hectares, is quite big. The football fans have done the maths. 370 football fields could be fit into Don Rodrigo. That's an incredible number. And this project with its 175 megawatts was built in 9 months. Now, you may say, well, yeah, we all have heard that it works in Southern Europe. We know that, but indeed it also works in Northern Europe, and we're ever getting closer to the Nordics. We have done a project in Northern Germany, in Bad, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, that is, if I'm not completely wrong, Bad 5, that was also done and is done completely without subsidies, without any help from the governments. It has a 5-year PPA currently in place. And the good thing actually is that it's part of a series of projects that we did there who are win-win situations, or the thing that every developer probably is looking for. The local community is very happy because with what we pay them for the various projects in its various stages, they can completely finance the operating costs of their local airport. So they very much sustain the project and are very happy, and we are also happy too. But 5 was a bit smaller, and therefore it was done in 4 months. Now the question is, where do we stand in the Nordics? On the next slide, you also see a chart that probably most of you have already seen. It's from 2016, done by the Becquerel Institute, so quite some time ago. And they estimated when will grid parity be reached in different countries. And as you have seen, well, Southern Europe is already there, and they estimated that Oldenburg, for example, in Germany would be ready in 2020. So I'm very curious to see what the outcome is of the poll. We think that due to the recent EPC price decrease leads to a speeding up of the development in the Nordics. And we think that subsidy-free PV could be done in a country like, for example, Denmark in 21-22, depending a bit also on the further development of the panel prices and what can we reach on the PPA market, where Mikkel will speak about in a few instances. So I'm also very curious to hear what he's going to tell us. Subsidy-free solar in the Nordic countries, plans and challenges. As I said, we currently have, mostly in Denmark, a pipeline of a giga or a bit more. The project size varies between 50 and 200 megawatt peak. Challenges, well, land, we see land has a good quality. And when we mean land has a good quality, we're not speaking about the land grade that we all remember from the UK. No, we mean that this is a land that is very suitable for photovoltaics. It has it's very reasonable shaped, and the ground is able to be rammed into so that the photovoltaic system can be anchored quite nicely. The grid, we have spoken to some DNOs. The feedback that we get is positive. There are some areas, especially in Denmark, where there's already some congestion we hear, where grid upgrades are required. So that may lead to a bit longer development times. PPAs, good outlook. We have had first feedback from the market. And as I said, I'm very curious to see what Mikkel is going to tell us. The experience transfer from other countries. Well, we think that the development approach is similar in photovoltaics, whether it be it Southern Europe or Northern Europe. Yeah, it's or even other countries. A photovoltaic system is a photovoltaic system. An impression that we have is, for example, a country like Denmark is more consensus driven. The thing that we do there, and that probably everybody is doing, is read out quite early to the local communities, get their feedback, take on board what they tell us, speak to other stakeholders and get them involved, and yeah, get a buy-in into the project. The TSOs, we find them very accessible and experienced in renewables, as they all have quite a big experience, for example, with wind projects. Peculiarities, yeah, a peculiarity that we saw when negotiating these agreements is the importance of drainage systems. Obviously, in countries like southern Spain or also southern Italy, drainage, probably due to the lack of rainfall, has not been much of a big problem, at least in our experience here. We have seen the importance of drainage, for example, in another country like the Netherlands, where you have the drainage canals that are very important. Why is it important for photovoltaics? Because obviously, if we damage these drainage systems, who can be quite expensive to reinstall, we are saddling the landowner with a problem, and we create a problem for the project itself if the land is not draining properly. So that is something that came to mind. I'm curious to see a question. Name's Alexander Sauer. Here you are the contact details, and yeah, please feel free to ask any question that you have.
And thanks, Alexander. So thank you, Alexander. I had a little microphone problem here. Nice presentation. I think I am, and I think the audience is curious about what Mikkel will have to tell us. We'll share the poll results later on. You'll see they are very interesting because the main result from the audience is the same, but there's quite some differences, I think, in terms of forecast seen from the audience being Denmark and Sweden. All I'll say at this stage is that definitely Denmark should come at a bit of an earlier stage than Sweden, but we'll get there in the Q&A. So now, Mikkel Kring. Mikkel, it's going to be your turn in just a few seconds. Mikkel is a partner at the company Our New Energy. Mikkel is holding a Master's of Science degree from the University of Aarhus in Denmark. He's handled all the activities in the UK for Danske Commodity, was their head of power generation, and he handled more than 6 gigawatts of renewable energy portfolio. And then Mikkel moved very recently, middle of last year, to Our New Energy, where he's now in charge of the Nordics and the UK market. And Mikkel, we have given you the control, so you should be able to get to your presentation. All the best.
Very good. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. And I very much confirm what has been said already, that the Nordic market is quite active at the moment, and especially the Danish market is experiencing quite a boost in renewable build-out, in solar build-out. It would be great if you could please put on my presentation. Excellent, thank you. So I think for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be covering 3 main points. I'll outline a little bit on why the market is interesting. I will outline a little bit focusing on the PPA and the power market to show how sensitive the market is to solar deployment, so the cannibalization. And then I'll look into a little bit on the PPA side as well, that there's a strong need really to from the developer and the investors to innovate to succeed, as these classical utility PPAs, 10-year pay-as-produced, is quite a scarce resource up here. So first of all, if I try to let me see here, next slide. Good. So indeed, I can confirm that solar is already now being built and planned for in especially Denmark, subsidy free. So as you see here, these are only some of the latest press releases for PPAs that have been announced for projects that are either totally unsubsidized or have been part of the recent subsidy rounds in Denmark. So there are actually small subsidies available for solar in Denmark at the moment, but the latest auction cleared at a premium of €2 approximately on top of the merchant price. So it's neglectable, and the politicians have already now been out and saying that they don't expect this to be available moving forward. But as these press releases show, indeed the market is vivid, it's progressing, and a lot of plans are being made. I think probably the ones you've already all heard about are the recent Google PPAs that were entered. Google entered a long range of PPA agreements globally not too long ago, and amongst those was a good chunk of solar projects in Denmark. I'll come into a little bit closer in terms of what terms they were signed under. So indeed the market is vivid. In terms of our new energy, we are a transaction advisor on PPAs, active all across Europe. So basically PPAs is what we do as a living. Our company was founded back in 2016 and have been leading the implementation of subsidy-free projects in Southern Europe, where to date we have done almost 2 gigawatts of PPAs, have assisted in transacting almost 2 gigawatts of PPAs in Southern Europe, and really now try to leverage on those, as Alexander also outlined, trying to leverage on those experiences made in a Southern European context within solar, and saying, okay, how can these be applied in a Nordic market context? And it's clear that from our work so far in Nordics, it's clear that as the market is evolving so quickly, the ability to apply best practice will be extremely important for the market, for the Nordic market to succeed. In terms of so we have a lot of experience in doing PPAs in Southern Europe. In terms of Northern Europe, we are also a significant voice up here in the Nordic PPA market. As Thomas outlined, I've been sitting as head of origination at Danske Commodities, managing our PPA portfolio, negotiating 10-year fixed price deals in a Nordic market context, and advising on corporate PPAs and on utility PPAs. And we have seen quite a interesting development in the sense that more and more people are looking to enter the Nordic market. I think if you go back, let's say 2 years, not many people were expecting solar power to reach market parity or grid parity in the Nordics. At least not our native Danes. When I sit here and look outside the window, it's raining, so not much production today. Let me see here. I click to the next slide. In terms of just for all of us to align, when we speak about the Nordic market, the Nordic market consists of a range of price zones where they share a common system price, and then on top of that they have regional EPAD prices. And the market is quite famous for its availability of long tenured contracts, which goes up to 10 years. And they then come in conjunction with these EPAD prices, which are the regional prices, for example, for DK1, DK2, SE4, which is where we see by far the biggest activity on solar. These goes up to 3 years of liquidity. If we then try to look a little bit into why the market is why the Nordic market is so interesting, well, it comes down to a range of factors. Where politically we have recently had an election where there's been set some ambitious targets of reducing emissions, and really a big attentiveness establishing a position for Denmark as an innovator within green energy, as we've been shown also with the companies Vestas and Ørsted and so on. So a lot of innovation is going on in the market with concerning Power 2X, concerning hybrid projects consisting of wind and solar in combination, and also our TSO Energinet is very active in trying to integrate proactively renewables into the system. So already today, actually, wind is delivering a lot of the regulation that is going on. But probably the most important factor for the attractiveness of the Danish market is the demand. Because as you see on the right-hand side here, demand is expected to increase significantly in the Danish market. And this will especially come from what's called heat pumps and data centers. So most of these data centers from Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple, they're actually planning to have connections in the Nordics, in Denmark, in Sweden and Norway, because we have relatively to other European markets, we have lower power prices, we have a very stable grid, and we have a relatively cold environment. And all of these factors makes it very attractive for data centers. And these data centers, as we all know, consumes a lot of power, and indeed they've been very active on the PPA side of things. So a significant demand growth has of course a very important influence on both the projections for power prices, but also the projections for the availability of corporate PPAs. If we try to then move attention a little bit to the Danish market and the Nordic market and some of the underlying functionality of the power market, well, then it's clear that this significant uncertainty that we're currently seeing in terms of future solar deployment complicates a little bit the long-term pricing and investment decision. And I've tried to outline this with taking a graph on the left-hand side of the screen, where you see this is for Germany, where you see basically the cannibalization effect. So you have the market value factor, which is a base load. So and then you have the different renewable technologies and what their capture price is up against the base load price. And as you see for solar, back in 2010-11, the capture price was significantly above base load, whereas today it's actually significantly below. And if we then move to the graph just next to that, you'll see that there's a very steep slope if you draw a straight line based on the historical developments. You'll see that the expected cannibalization for solar is very high, even at a relatively limited penetration. And this is due to a range of factors. It's due to a lack of correlation, you could say, between demand and solar production. You see that in countries like Spain and Italy, well, when the sun is up and it's hot during the summer, people also turn on the aircon. That is not to the same extent the case up here in the Nordics. Therefore, there's a lower correlation between solar output and demand, and therefore there's also a higher expected cannibalization. You will see that today solar produce very little of the Danish and also Swedish energy mix. In Denmark, it's around 2.5%. So really, the influence from solar is neglectable. You'll see that historically, solar has delivered a average of an 8% premium compared to baseload, with a big underlying fluctuation. But this fluctuation is really not as much a function of solar deployment, because the influence is so limited. It's more a function of underlying fundamental prices from gas and so on. So this is of course important from an investor perspective, as this high sensitivity makes the choice of long-term power curve crucial. So for example, if you in your investor case is you are using Baringa or Puri, well, their build-out scenario gets suddenly extremely important for the expected future earnings. As if they get it wrong with a couple of gigawatts, their energy price forecast will also be very wrong. As an example, at our new energy, we have had we were involved in a larger solar asset in Texas, in US, and where they face somewhat the same issue, that they have a relatively immature solar market, but the solar market has a huge pipeline build-up, so there's a lot of uncertainty in how will the deployment look in the years to come. And there we were advising a client of ours in terms of trying to adjust their Baringa equivalent forecast to really have some valid stressed scenarios in terms of what would be the solar deployment moving forward, and what would be the consequentially what would be the impact on prices. This is a extremely important exercise, as these graphs show. Secondly, well, if you look into graphs like this, and combined with the significant uncertainty about deployment, well, then as an off-taker, as a PPA provider, it's also very difficult to price your PPA. What price are you willing to pay for a pay-as-produced PPA for next 10 years? Because as an off-taker, you are equivalently not able to hedge your pay-as-produced risk, so you'll take that on the books. And consequently, what we see in the market on the PPAs that we are involved in, pricing becomes highly subjective. We've been we worked on a 5-year fixed price PPA here in Denmark for a subsidy-free solar asset in DK1 recently, where we were gathering quotes and basically ended up with a more than a 10% differential between the quotes on a 5-year deal. I think that's quite a significant spread, and that makes sort of it very important to be close to the market and understand the position of each of the off-takers, or the view at least from each of the off-takers. What do they expect from the market? Then if we try to look a little bit on what kind of PPAs we see in the more Nordic market, well, basically we have utility PPAs and corporate PPAs, right? In terms of the utility PPAs, really what we see in the Nordic Futures Market is that it does not really support the long-term fixed price with utilities, because in spite of us having a 10-year curve to look at for the system price, and a 3-year curve to look at for the EPAD price, as you see from the bottom left side, there's really no liquidity on the curve. Beyond 2023, there's the open interest, so the willingness to buy and sell is almost non-existing. You'll see that the liquidity on the curve is currently facing a 21-year low, so there's not a lot of volumes being traded, and therefore the big bid-ask spreads, so what are people willing to buy for and what are people willing to sell at, has very significant spreads. And this implies that the off-takers in the market are very reluctant actually to enter these long-term pay-as-produced PPAs. And from the incumbents, let's say the big 4 or 5, they do not at the moment offer 10-year pay-as-produced PPAs. And we know that because we recently been doing a PPA, searching for PPAs for a bigger portfolio of solar assets here in Denmark, and there we had to go to a let's say non-existing market participant to find a 10-year pay-as-produced price. We managed to do so, but again, it was not from let's say a player that was currently active in the market. So the transparency of the market is fairly limited. If we then go to look at well, how does it then look on corporate PPA side? Well, they've actually proven to be quite an attractive PPA route in Denmark so far, where we've seen Google sign up for a couple of PPAs, and also some of the larger industrial companies going for this. We've seen 10-year pay-as-produced PPAs being signed in excess of euro 33 per megawatt hour, including GOs. This has been for projects fairly close to COD, as this is still a strong preference on the corporate side. And what we also see is that, well, these tender processes are very competitive and rather comprehensive. And our assessment of the recent tenders was actually that the reason for this rather healthy pricing is actually that at the moment the availability of projects is fairly low, and the tender material issued by companies like Google was very material, so a lot of people decided not to participate. But our assessment is clearly that there will be scope to do more corporate PPAs in Denmark moving forward, based on the data center increase, and we believe that solar PV is very well suited to be able to participate in this market. One of the deal examples that we've been working on in Denmark, to give a little bit of flavor into what it is that we do, is this fixed hourly volume PPA, where basically the seller, the asset, obliges itself to deliver a pre-agreed hourly volume of electricity, and any risk associated with deviations from expectations is carried by the seller. We've seen similar products for wind being applied a lot in Nordics. What we call baseload PPAs, so basically where the project commits to delivering a certain baseload volume, so a fixed volume per hour throughout the year. But what we're trying to now apply for solar is that you deliver a fixed volume of power, but with an hourly granularity. And we have had this is a quite popular product in the US. This is where we've gotten our inspiration from. We are active on a couple of bigger solar projects in the US and try to drive some learnings from those markets. And we are seeing that they're applied quite successfully. So we are also looking quite extensively into this and negotiating this with some of our clients. So wrapping this up, I think the three key components in the winning formula, as we see it from a developer and an investor perspective, is one, really the ability to quantify your options. So you need to be able to do your math. You need to be able to understand what are the different scenarios that's outlined. Are those scenarios modeled by Baringa or Puri? Are they realistic? How should they be modeled given the high uncertainty that we currently face? How are the different PPA options quantified? If we go for this fixed hourly volume versus a baseload versus a pay-as-produced versus a 3-year versus a 5-year PPA, what does this entail? That is really important that you're able to quantify these options and make the right choices. Secondly, given the evolving market, it's extremely important to stay close to the market. As we saw, the spreads on the PPA pricing offered by the off-takers vary quite significantly. The prices that investors pay for projects in Nordics vary quite significantly depending on what power curve they use. And really the power market is also evolving quite quickly these days with higher liquidity during certain periods and so on. So staying close to the market is important. And then thirdly, best practice. Again, we see the successful players at the moment, they are applying what we call co-location, so placing wind together with solar, maybe even attaching batteries. They're looking into bifacial or trackers. We are currently trying to evaluate what is the potential for weather derivatives. All of these things is really important also to succeed, because in contrast to the Southern European markets, the Nordic market is it's more tight. The irradiation is lower, the power prices are lower, but indeed there's good scope for doing more projects. We see gigawatts of pipeline up here, but it's probably more for the few and for the really for the people who really understand the market in depth. And that's of course as our new energy with a base here in Nordics and with the track record that we have, this is of course where we believe that we add a large part of our value. That was it from my side. I hope you found this quick fly-in useful, and by all means, I also look forward to the Q&A now and to continue the conversations moving forward.
Well, thanks a lot, Mikkel. Really interesting presentation. I think it's showing like there's a lot of potential in the region, globally speaking, for like PPAs, and then like more globally than like the whole development of solar energy. So indeed, it's going to be question and answer time. But before that, we'll let's not forget like the polls from Alexander. Just giving the opportunity to the audience. On your screen, on that little communication box, you should be able to see like the question sub box, or whatever it's called in English. Please submit your questions. We received some already, but like feel free, drop your questions. We will get into the Q&A for real in like a few minutes. Before that, let's get into the polls. As I shared before, like similar in terms of, let's say, high-level results, but big differences. So we're going to try to get them on the screen. I think you should all see them now. So Denmark, what did the audience say? I think it's a clear majority there, Alexander. So as you can see, like most of the audience is saying 2 to 3 years. So there's something bubbling. We have some people a bit more positive on the 1 year term, some looking a bit more on the long term. But what's super interesting is that also nobody's saying never. So really looking like an interesting market with stuff coming then indeed in 2 to 3 years. If we move to Sweden, well, same stuff from a high level question. We're putting the slide online. It should be coming anytime. Yes, Sweden. Same result from a high level perspective. Most of the votes went, even if it's not a majority, to the 2 to 3 years. But then as you can see, like a lot less people are mentioning 1 year, a lot more 5 years, and there's even a few people who mentioned never. So Alexander, we'll pass you, like we'll unmute you and maybe see if you've got like some comments on that, some thoughts.
No, I'm
sorry,
unmuted.
Alexander.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yes,
well,
now you're unmuted.
I found the button and I could press it, yeah. Well, it is certainly interesting, yeah, to see that people apparently share a bit the trajectory that we are doing. Yeah, they see Denmark first, Sweden second. We really should have added the third one on Norway and Finland probably to see how that turned out. I'm very happy that to see that in a sense people share our view. It would certainly be very interesting to hear from the 3% who never see Sweden to come around to 1 giga of installed solar, being a very interesting opinion, and it would be interesting to speak to them. Sadly, I guess we cannot do that here. So perhaps on your conference in April,
exactly,
we have the chance to speak to them, or see what their thoughts are. I'm very curious to hear that. I don't know, Mikkel, what would be your takeaway? Do you share the view? Is it too optimistic? You have been a bit sobering, but also I heard some quite some positive notes from you, right?
Yes, exactly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Good.
Yes.
Good. So no, I would say for Denmark, I'm also even more positive than this poll actually. I believe that a lot is going on already. We've already seen, I think it was just before Christmas, a transaction was announced where 150 megs of solar is being built completely without a PPA here in Denmark. And I mean, just from the let's say involvements that we have, definitely I think definitely within 2 to 3 years, but I would also say within 1 to 2 years, we're going to see 1 gigawatt of solar being built completely without subsidies. For the Danish market, I'm very positive. Things are going. We're having a lot of conversations at the moment. I think Sweden as E4 is also very interesting, but people have sort of been a little bit more slow to react there. I think we have quite a couple of international strong players in Denmark as well within solar that has seen the opportunity quite early on and has already established a good pipeline and position there. Yeah. So Denmark, I share the view, relatively Denmark quicker than Sweden, but I'm even more bullish on Denmark than what the poll shows.
Okay, well, thanks, Mikkel. I propose we have like 8 minutes left before the end of the webinar. We have questions flowing in, so let's get there. I'll just like tell you both if it's a question, in my opinion, more for one or the other. I'll go back to Alexander with a question, actually, like 2 questions, which I will merge in one. So I'll read those 2 one after the other. They're kind of having the same content in a way. So question number 1. Denmark may be in the same line as Germany in terms of radiation, tariffs, etc. But what about countries like Finland, where there's lots of snow, forest, really long, dark winters, or like those big mountains in Norway? And the second question, very similar like to this, is what about the cold conditions like frost and snow? Are they not making projects for like solar development even more difficult to implement, more costly, or is it maybe a misconceived idea? What do you think, Alexander?
Okay, well, thank you. Both very interesting questions, I guess. On the first one with the long, dark winters, well, Mikkel, I guess in a sense, mentioned that when he spoke about the PPAs, right? About the disconnection between the consumption and the production. Yeah, obviously you would want to match them, as he has told, and as things happen also in Southern Europe. That certainly is a challenge. On the cold conditions, actually, from a technical perspective, we don't really expect big problems. Yeah, as we also agreed, and as we heard with Google and Apple, electronics prefer rather lower temperatures as opposed to higher ones. And then if we look at such system elements as the inverters, yeah, they do operate in a minus 25 to 60 degree environment. So that probably is not a problem in the northern countries. And what we see, for example, on trafos, well, they rather have a problem with altitude, right? Over 1,000 meters, you have to change the trafo setup. So rather low countries, well, obviously there's also mountains, but I guess overall we don't expect problems to happen. The thing that we do see is that heavy frost could lead to increased mounting costs because the ramming depth has to be perhaps increased due to the thawing of the ground and refreezing. So that could be an element that could increase costs as opposed to projects in Germany. But overall, we don't think that there should be a big problem. No.
Okay, and bouncing back onto that, Mikkel, don't worry, like the question after will be for you. But bouncing onto that, like from your perspective, Alexander, like do you think it can be a good idea to install like big solar fields really up north in like Norway, Sweden, Finland? Because there's a lot of space there. They got like the midnight sun kind-ish in like between, depending on the location, April and August. Do you think it's good, or you would like still favor like the southernmost locations?
Well, as probably also as Mikkel going to tell us, right? You have to take care of the consumption. If you are too far north and there is no transmission net available, and you have something that in Germany we know quite well, right? The problem that you have energy production from wind, for example, in northern parts of Germany, and the consumption is rather in the southern parts. So how do you get the energy from A to B? That would be something that I guess I would have to look into. If that landed on my desk, I have to admit, I haven't done that now. So that would be something that would come to my minds. And then if this could be matched to consumption and to an offtake, I guess the BayWa answer would be, why not?
Okay, fair point. Mikkel, let's switch to you. We have a question actually from Japan even for you. So Mikkel, thanks for your great presentation. what sort of factors resulted in the similar findings in Texas and Nordics, where penetration rate of PV to the grid is quite different?
Sorry, can you please repeat the question, Thomas?
Yeah, sure. So it was based on like your similar findings in Texas and Nordics. What sort of factors resulted in then the similar findings you had when it came to the penetration rate of photovoltaic in the grid, let's say, feeding, if I'm using the right word?
Yeah, sure. So I think the point is that the US market in general is a very advanced market in terms of financing. So in US they apply a lot of options on financing renewables, and in general the financing community is very well advanced. As we have been active on some solar projects over there, what we're trying to do is to take some of those, let's call it more advanced PPA structures, and trying to introduce both to the financing community and also to the banks and to the investors in a European context, trying to introduce some of these PPA structures, where it's basically you have on one side you have a fully merchant project, and on the complete other side you have a pay-as-produced PPA, where the off-taker is taking all of the risk. And what we're trying to do is to find the optimal middle way in between those two outskirts. And one of those markets where we find inspiration is the Texan market, because it's American market, so it has quite high sophistication. But at the same time, solar deployment today is not very high, and the expectations for the future are very high. So these are the factors.
Okay, fair. And like, so I'm seeing the clock turning. We have a number of questions, but I'd say like, Mikkel, let's have the final question for you, and then I'll wrap up this nice webinar. So Mikkel, a more broad question, maybe not just for the Nordic, but an interesting one. When does our new energy normally enter the development process?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I think increasingly, because the dynamics of the markets are changing, we enter earlier and earlier. So let's say we began as a pure transaction, PPA transaction advisor. So we came in when the projects were almost ready to build, and we advised on the PPA, we structured it, we negotiated it, and we closed it together with our client. Whereas today, we see more and more ourselves teaming up with our clients in both, for some of the clients, choosing the right markets. So if a developer is looking, okay, which market should I enter? We help them in assessing the off-takeability of the different markets and help them in choosing amongst the markets. And we also help them in building their business cases. So for example, is a co-location a good idea for this project? Is it a good idea to attach a battery? It's a good, how does power to X, how does the whole innovation pipeline, the technological development look in the region and the technology you're looking into? And then I think finally, what is going on within the whole PPA space, financing space, technical design of the asset? Because we've done around 2 gigawatts of PPAs, but really we have a mandate base of 5 gigawatts of PPAs. So we see quite a lot of projects, we see quite a lot of business cases, we see quite a lot of ways to do things. And our clients would of course like to take advantage of that. So actually what we see is that we enter earlier and earlier in the process and help our clients in succeeding throughout the process. Yeah.
Well, thanks, and I really hope like you can help a lot of clients, and that well, the two of you, like Alexander and Mikkel, can really like push forward, help develop solar energy in the Nordics. So we're getting like very close to the end of the webinar. Just wanted to thank a lot all the audience for taking the time. I wanted to thank you again, Alexander and Mikkel, for also like taking the time, preparing this, and just educating the audience. Well, basically, again, this was our webinar for the Solar Future Nordics conference, our very first event, which will take place in Stockholm on April 1st. I've said that before, but I can't outline it enough. Our very early bird pricing is expiring this Friday at like 23:59.59. So you still have like a bit more than 2 days to buy the ticket at the cheapest possible price. I'm looking forward to meet all of you, or as many as possible of you there, and that we will have all of us a great event that will, just like have a major contribution to solar development in the region. With that said, thanks everybody. Thanks for attending, and have a great afternoon and remainder of the week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.